fooled me once. Shame on you. It fooled me. We can't get fooled again.
Well, welcome everyone. Official broadcast of Reframing the Narrative. I am one of your hosts, PJ Warren of the Central Texas Rabbit Hole, and with me is Discerning Jake. And Jake, why don't you go ahead and do a quick introduction about yourself, and I'll do the same afterwards.
Well, cool. Thanks, PJ. It's great to be finally kicking this off. We've been tossing this idea around for quite a while, and it's finally arrived. So here we are launching our show. And I briefly just wanted to talk about myself and my growth really as somebody who just doesn't want to be on the other side of that Who song, won't get fooled again. And the reason I call myself Discerning Jake is those are my actual initials if you're going to dox me. So that's a good trail to follow. But if you're going to look up DJ, I'd rather be Discerning Jake than anything else, because I think that the power of discernment is one of our most important faculties. And my big takeaway on the world is that, yeah, it is out to get you right now, but there's so many different basically false solutions and so many saviors out there. And we really need to exercise discernment really at every turn, but not get overwhelmed with everything. So we need to realize that the power is with us and our creator and our faith in our creator. The way I like to practice that as kind of like meditation, where you observe things going on. You don't completely go off the grid and unplug, but you observe, but don't get too enwrapped and involved in everything. So who I am, somebody that's experienced a few awakenings over really since realizing 9/11 was not what they said it was, and then going to the Nicholasburg beheading that was so fake. That's what really woke me up, and realizing that we went to war on all these pretexts. So it's been a long journey, and I don't really represent myself as having any kind of a monopoly on truths or really knowing what the truth is. I just know that I want to protect myself with discernment from all the lies out there. And we're in an age of great deception. So discernment is a wise approach.
I couldn't agree more, Jake, and I'll just jump in there. So much like Jake had described, I've had a couple awakenings in my lifetime. The first being seeing 9/11 unfold like everyone else did, but I had a little help from going back to the idea of the creator being our ultimate truth. I had a little help before all that went down, where I had this whisper in my ear watching a movie, and at this point I was in my early 20s, and there was this little voice with all this propaganda that was going on at the time that said, what are they preparing us for? And it took me a while after the events of 9/11 to really understand what was going on, and to even realize that there was a story behind the story. But that was once I started kind of putting pieces together, and finding a lot of the common authors out there, like the G. Edward Griffin, or like the Jim Mars, some really pivotal guys in the conspiracy world, started opening my eyes to taking a peek behind the curtain and seeing what's really there. And getting back to Jake's point about discernment, at the time I was led astray by some of those false saviors and led to believe it was really just a left versus right thing. So of course it was the right in control at that time, and for me it was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a lefty now, and that's the direction I went. And I was slowly lulled to sleep until the events of 2020 and house arrests, and that sort of snapped me to, and really just kind of reignited my passion for understanding the truth and looking into things. And it's been quite an interesting journey, but I'll say there were a few milestones along the way. One, realizing the lies behind virology and everything that unfolded with 2020, and then realizing the shape of the earth and how that ties to our definite creation and our purpose here. And then even more recently, to touch on what Jake was saying about this time of deception, it's really been for me just really realizing that there's even another level still, that, and we'll get into this in future discussions, but it's my personal opinion that we're in Satan's little season, referred to in Revelation 20, and everything that we see around us is an intentional inversion and deception, and we really have to just use that discernment to navigate our way through. So that's where I'm coming at it from. I've just started a channel called the Central Texas Rabbit Hole. You can also find me on Telegram, looking up the Central Texas Rabbit Hole. We'll get into more of that soon enough, but that's so we have a lot planned. Jake and I have been discussing this for a while. A lot of topics such as who are the powers that be, what are some of the key details around the big events out there, what's going on in the world now, what can we expect to see in 2025 and beyond. How does this all link up to Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 and everything in between that the UN and all the controllers have been putting out there in the mainstream. So a lot to talk about, and I'm glad we're kicking this off. So Jake, I'll hand it back to you. What other framework should we put out there right now as we're just getting this set up?
Well, thanks, PJ. I think it's really important to emphasize that we're not here to add our voice to the doom and gloom and the people that are just constantly harping on, what they are doing to us. And it's okay to identify who they are and still not really be. I think it's more important to know what they're doing and who they are as a type of human, and even sometimes question how human they are or their humanity. But to me, I got caught up in that whole thing of like what they're doing in very Alex Jones types fashion. They're doing this, they're doing that, and I think that empowers what they are doing, if because it ends up in kind of a learned helplessness, to use an overused clinical term. And it's more important to just realize that those with the levers of control do not have our best interests at heart. They practice all sorts of deception and rituals, and basically enact trauma on society. And I don't want to contribute to people's trauma by calling attention to this. I want to really emphasize that the power is within us to stop it. So you mentioned the lies of virology, and we're cutting to the chase really quickly. But the whole point of realizing that we're not at war against viruses is empowerment, because then when we take the next steps, we end up realizing that our health, to the extent that we can manage it, of course, if you're getting sprayed with things or whatever, subjected to environmental factors, that's another thing that we don't have absolute control over. But what we can control is how we approach our health, what we put in our bodies, with the kind of sleep we get, if we surround ourselves with EMFs and things like that, and then what we do about it and how we feel about it. So I just wanted to mention those things. We're not going to contribute to the whole Alex Jones thing here, although that was a nice little set of training wheels that I did wear for a while on my bike.
We all start somewhere, and I think that's a perfect segue to something I was just thinking about listening to you just now, which is, and you mentioned this earlier, we don't have the corner on truth, and there's so much that we're always learning. And we hope to build a community of followers who are on the same path. And we absolutely start somewhere. I remember the first person that sort of gave me that nudge to wake up in 2020 was actually someone now who I view with a very suspicious lens. That person being David Icke, and he was the one I watched a video, and he's like, there is no bloody virus. It was one of those things where I was like, you know what if he's right? And that
Yeah.
was, so sometimes the gatekeepers are important as a starting point. And even old subjects like 9/11, where you feel like you've heard and seen it all, there's still people digging up details around that. And together as a community, we can put this picture together. And as Jake had said, it's really about, so how are we going to live our lives in light of the knowledge that we uncovered. But Jake, I don't know if you saw agents post, I think it was within the last year, about 9/11 and pictures, but that's a pretty wild mind bender too. That's, we could talk about that as one other subject in the future, but even when you think you know it all, you don't. And so we're here to, Jake and I, to discuss some of the things that we've uncovered that are happening, and as well as we'll have some guests on and get their take on things, and together we'll just continue putting those pieces together. But yeah, I just had to throw it out there that we're not here to tell you exactly what to do or how to live your life, or that we know all the answers, but together I think we can form a pretty good picture.
Absolutely. I think it's also important to note that I don't anticipate really attacking anybody. We're not about personalities, and anybody can have some good information. I was just setting up a Twitter account for my Discerning Jake. So Jake Discerning at Jake Discerning on Twitter. That's where I'll be going forward. And there's a Tommy Robinson is trending right now. Tommy Robinson's absolutely right about a lot of things. And then some other people are pointing out Tommy Robinson wore a Mossad t-shirt. He's just out in the open. So you take the good where you can find it, and that's where you need to exercise discernment. There's people that I know, both you and I, PJ, we really have learned a lot from, if not admired, along the way. And then we find out things like they might be pushing some certain supplements or different practices that we find a bit suspect, but that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, but I don't think we're going to be in the business of making personal attacks as far as this information goes.
Absolutely, but I think there are some trends out there that you'll see with people that you maybe should use a little extra discernment when listening to their broadcasts or some of their suggested solutions, because we really are in a world of deception, and it's really difficult to figure out who's got more truth content in what they're providing than others, and just kind of, again, putting the picture together and seeing whether it makes sense in light of the things that we know to be absolutely true.
Totally agree. That's why we're here together.
All right. So since we've laid the foundation for the Reframing the Narrative podcast, I think it's now kind of what's next and ahead for this podcast and everyone in general. And 2025 is going to be quite the year. It's been talked about for decades from various people in occult circles as well as in centers of power. So big year that's been talked about by the likes of Helen Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, many others of that ilk, as well as a UN target date, kind of marching towards 2030. But 2025 has been one of those years, and we've already seen a number of events taking place that look highly questionable that we'll be covering. Jake, I think that you had mentioned you found some interesting information about what happened in New Orleans recently. Maybe we can start there.
Sure. Well, I think when any of these events happen and our attention is directed to it, it might be fruitful to ask yourself why the attention, even if it's like a cat up a tree in East Peoria, Illinois. Why is the media all reporting on a cat up a tree in East Peoria, Illinois? Obviously, if a major attack and major damage to life and property occurs, that is newsworthy, but how is it framed and why is our attention directed to it is always worth reflecting on. And then it's always interesting to me to follow up and look at it and go, has this story been dropped? Did it run its course or did it not get, did it not get legs, that kind of thing? So there was a truck that was driven into a crowd in New Orleans right off Bourbon Street or on Bourbon Street on New Year's Day, which as we record this was yesterday in very recent memory. And I just learned that the police chief in New Orleans is the former police chief of Oakland, California, where she was so bad and crime skyrocketed under her tutelage and direction so high that she was taken out of office but rewarded with a bigger city to look over. And apparently her statements on what happened have been very puzzling to a lot of people. And there's also already anomalies, such as they always have what is called in British parlance bollards, or basically pillars or posts, are normally up at that area, and they weren't because they were saying they were preparing for the Super Bowl, which is sometime in February, I believe. I'm not a football fan. At any rate, there's all of these things, and we can get sucked up in the details on these things. But really, the idea is basically to reflect for me on why did this take place and what are they saying in the public realm where there is so much deception. And we're already seeing these weird things such as like FBI warnings, suspiciously missing bollards, somebody that is literally her claim to fame is the longevity that she's had in the police force, and she's a DEI advocate. That's about it. As far as like enforcement and making improvements in the force, things like that, nothing on her resume. So typical. And it reminds me of the guy that was in charge of the Las Vegas police in 2017 at the shootings, after the shootings, and helped cover that up. And then he was rewarded with a nice job in Lahaina, Hawaii, on Maui.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, it makes me a coincidence theorist for sure.
Yeah, well, the other thing I found interesting from the scant details we've been provided so far is that supposedly in this vehicle they found some sort of ISIS flag, which for anyone who has looked at what happened with 9/11 and subsequent invasions of the Middle East should already give you that red flag in your mind of there's something fishy going on. So apparently this person was ex-military, which to me smacks of some kind of MK Ultra or mind control. I'm sure we'll get more of these details as days go on, but it definitely feels like some sort of staged event, and we'll continue to monitor this and report out whatever we find out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important. One thing I've learned to, once again, kind of apply a filter to apply to any of these things is that there are organic. Not everything is like a false flag. Not everything is a conspiracy. Although when two or more people get together and devise a plan of action, in a sense, it really does fit the definition of conspiracy. But I will never refer to myself as a conspiracy theorist. So just getting that out of the way. But even if things do happen organically, I tend to be curious as to how they play out in the public realm, because they can always be spun by people that do have control over those channels of information dissemination. So I think that's always worth pointing out.
Yeah, and lines really start to get blurred when you think about the fact that it's actually legal for the government to create fake news stories and give that to the media, and it's up to the media to inform the public if they're actually watching a government-sponsored advertisement or fiction. I think it was like in 1937 there was an act that was put out, and I can't remember the name of that off the top of my head, but I'll follow up on the next podcast with that information. But there was a famous interview back in the GW era where one of the reporters had asked specifically, how GW felt about these videos being released to the media without any sort of disclaimer, and even GW at that time had said, well, we're following the letter of the law and legal guidance and opinions, and it's really for the media to tell people that what they're watching is some sort of government sponsored or created video, essentially, and that it has to be somewhat based in fact, and that's sort of the legal opinion, but just more evidence that what you see on TV is often not reality and can be blurred with many levels of deception intermingled. So, kind of getting back to the prior discussion about discernment and really deciding, what's the motivation behind what you're seeing on the tell live vision.
Or as I sometimes refer to it as the Talmud vision. And you can infer why. Yeah. So, any thoughts on Mario versus Luigi at the moment? You digging into that story at all? Not
I
the Mario
haven't, but
part specifically.
with the 24/7 news cycle coverage it had there for a while, yeah, there's some sort of shenanigans going on with that. I think, Jake, you and I had talked offline about this need for a hero, and I wonder if that has something to do with it. Maybe you can expand on your thoughts around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. I think what we've seen in cycles, right? People tend to align with a certain ideology, or we're tribal. So humans are tribal. We're mammals. We run in packs, and we want to belong to a group, and that makes us easily pick sides. I mean, even in the last baseball season, my absolute least favorite teams in all of Major League Baseball are the ones that end up in the World Series. Yet I found myself wanting, I had that natural inclination to want to pick a side. And at the same time, so we're always looking for heroes, uh, and just like we pick sports teams. And so we choose left and right. We're looking for somebody to come out and guide us, if not save us. And I noticed that kind of pattern when pretty much since we kind of started referring to history of this century so far in our discussions, people were just shell shocked. They had PTSD after the Bush years, and they were looking for somebody to come out and save them. And that savior was provided to them in the form of an empty suit named Barack Hussein Obama. And that put the left to sleep as he proceeded to become George Bush Jr. Jr. And then the way the Obama administration proceeded and Hillary was threatening to proceed really got people who think of themselves as conservatives or the right up in arms, and who appears and who ends up in the White House but Trump. And then he proceeds to become Mr. Warp Speed. And the right just kind of laid down. And they allowed all that to happen, and they weren't clamoring for accountability. And you just see that happen over and over again. It only took one term for people to get really tired of Biden and all the stuff that they were doing with the wokeness and everything, giving money away left and right to Ukraine and Israel and all that stuff. So it's just so easy to kind of align with people who don't have your best interests at heart, and follow along with narratives that weren't your story to begin with, and we buy into these stories. And one thing that happens is because we love stories and we're always looking for heroes. And I've just kind of inferred or observed that this Luigi guy that's been given to us as the CEO assassin, in some circles, people are making him out to be a hero. And I like to think of it as the character, because I don't know the reality of this guy, but the Luigi character the guy who went to UPenn and was in some kind of a high paying career, or at least on a track for a high paying career, from a very wealthy family, and perhaps wealthier than the CEO that he allegedly unalived. Um, this guy has become like a sex symbol. So, but what are the people who are projecting that on him, making him a sex symbol? What is their desire at the moment? That's worth inferring. So there's a vacuum of real men, maybe, or people taking action. And this is obviously not the solution, but people will project it and they'll be like, get rah rah for the moment for a couple of weeks, and they'll love Luigi, and then they go on to the next thing. So we're probably already on to the next thing by now, right?
Yeah, that was so a month ago, but I think that you're really onto something, and as we approach this milestone of 2025 that's been talked about, as I mentioned earlier, for so long, it really, I wonder if some of this sets up, as you're saying, Jake, about this hero complex. Well, what if Helen Blavatsky and Alice Bailey were right, that some grand savior shows up this year and pretends to have the solution for humanity? How many people are going to bite on that? You know, whether that's Project Bluebeam and some variation thereof, where there's mass destruction and some golden-haired savior shows up to offer the solution. You should be quite suspicious if it's back to the Hegelian dialect, problem reaction solution. So it's just something really to monitor. Like, are we just the frogs in the boiling pot as the temperature getting turned up slowly on us? And I think that we're seeing that more and more. Even with the recent shooting before the election, I think that there's some of that similar type of suspicious behavior there. So I think it's just something to keep an eye on, and just be always asking what's the motivation behind this news cycle and story that's being foisted upon everyone.
Exactly. And it's important to ask yourself, what are they trying to make me feel? Because we know that people are emotionally driven, and that we actually receive information based on how we feel about a certain topic, or yeah, our feelings towards anything, subject, object, doesn't matter. And that's how we filter things. So if your emotions are open towards something, you're more receptive to it. And so going back to like my incremental, I'd say, beginning of exercising discernment was when I felt just bombarded by regular, and this is like 90s, so almost 30 years ago. I just felt like I'm being told what I should pay attention to by the selection of topics in the news. And I felt like I wanted to at least exercise some control over it and be more proactive in my what I put into my body, literally, and through my eyes into my mind and spirit. And I canceled my cable subscription. And one of the things that I noticed that back then was, because Time and Newsweek were still kind of king of the media back then, was that they would even have the same cover story when it wasn't even kind of a national event. You know, it wasn't like both doing an expose on the Nobel Prize winner in science or something like that, you know, lying about the AIDS and being some guy with a solution for AIDS, or like a peacemaker or something like that in their terms. It would be something really weird, like, let's talk about firefighters this week. You know, we'll do something about firefighters. And they had different stories in different regions about firefighters, but it was Time and Newsweek, who are supposedly like the Yankees and Red Sox, you know, supposedly kind of adversaries. And it just didn't make sense to me that there's something out there in the consciousness that they're trying to control and take direction of. And I started resisting it with that. So it's always, that's where I go when I see these things.
Absolutely. And you had touched on a point earlier that I wanted to circle back to. It slipped my mind with your prior explanation, but the media definitely plays the left versus right, and kind of what you were talking about earlier, having to pick a side or a team. But I saw an interesting video recently by a great podcaster named Tim Truth, and he mentioned how often the worst ideas are hatched and developed first in the right and then pushed into the mainstream. And this kind of ties into what we've been seeing with the drone phenomena in New Jersey. Suddenly you've got the right calling for regulations and some sort of way of stopping these deadly drones, right? And you have to question what's the real implication of
Mm-hmm.
controlling airspace even tighter than it is today, and potentially taking one more potential freedom away from the citizens. But the side that typically identifies with freedom and liberty is the one that's clamoring for new regulations and the government to step in and do something. So just I think this is another example of be careful about picking a side and what they represent. I think it's all for us to have that individual discernment and decide, whether what's being prescribed for us is really in our best interest.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's just really important to, when you feel yourself wanting to ally with a particular side, ask yourself why. Is it because they're so good or because you're so weak? Just like, what makes me want to join this team and kind of give up that sovereignty and autonomy in making my own analysis and decisions by allowing it to filter through some kind of a paradigm. Yeah, New Jersey. Just I've thought of that as well. Like I've been known to fly a drone from time to time personally, and that could be coming. There's a lot going on in that space as well. Like there's actually there was a bill that was passed to ban the import of DJI's drones. DJI is the leading manufacturer of both hobbyist and professional drones for up to videography through heat maps of bridges and finding cracks and things like that. DJI makes all sorts of industrial use drones as well, not just like flying cameras. So yeah, it's always important to not get sucked into these things and say, yeah, we need more of something, and the solutions that other people are handing out there easily to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does make you wonder going into 25 if this is just the thunder in the distance of the big Project Bluebeam that's been talked about for many years as well. This idea that, oh, it's something alien in nature, and we need to be more in fear and looking for some ready-made solution. That wild speculation on my part, but there's always multiple motivations behind any of these big events. So be interesting to track that, or if it, as you said earlier, Jake, becomes one of those dead stories that just their trial balloon didn't have enough participants and they decided to put that back on the shelf.
Yeah, are you aware whether did the drones take off? Did they take the New Year's Eve off and go drink some champagne? Do you know? Are you aware of
I think they all ended up on Bourbon Street.
Ooh,
I'm joking.
That was their beverage of choice, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They went off to Bourbon Street. Yeah, I've been looking forward. I've been preparing. I'm very good at making popcorn now. After all these years, I'm ready to just make some popcorn and finally see Project Bluebeam unfold, because we've been looking at that coming down and we're just wondering, will it play out? And getting to my kind of more maybe spiritual angle on things, and I can't help but wonder, like, if our attention to things like maybe what do you call it, like hypotheticals in a way of like Project Bluebeam, do we kind of contribute to them manifesting by focusing, like, are they going to do it to us? Just trying to get out of that. But I'm observing, like, with popcorn to see what happens. But before that, maybe do we want to answer the question, is space indeed fake and gay?
So fake, so gay. But I think that we're going to have to save that for another podcast to dig into that. But I
Absolutely
think
agree.
many of our followers will agree, and there's a lot of fertile ground there to be covered. But yeah, going back to Werner von Braun and his prediction. Now, it's a good point you bring up there, Jake. That like, are we giving it energy by focusing on it or thinking about it or whatever? It's a good point and something to keep in mind. I mean, it's sort of like I'm sure many of our listeners will be familiar with the revelation method, where the controllers feel like, and this could be a Freemason thing or something much deeper, but they feel like they have to tell you and put the truth out there in plain sight. And if you participate either knowingly or unknowingly, then they're absolved of any quote unquote bad karma. And where we put our time and focus is ultra important, and our time is quite limited on this earth. So just something to keep in mind. It's good to be aware and discerning, but do we need to spend our waking hours thinking or worrying about it? I don't think so.
Absolutely. And just remember that what do we do with attention? We pay attention. It's literally the only commodity that goes out of our body and spirit and we never get back in this life. And so it's very precious, and we want to be mindful of that as well. So you can feel free, if you're listening, to listen to us at 1.25 speed. I'm sure we'll sound just as good.
Excellent point, Jake. Yes, I consume a lot of content on anywhere between 1.5 and 2. So I'd hate to hear myself as a chipmunk version at 2, but understood if that's how you need to get through this podcast and others. So yeah, absolutely. This may be a good time for us to tell people where to find us, and maybe wrap up until next week.
Yeah, sounds good. You want to go first?
Sure. So as Jake and I mentioned earlier in this podcast, we're just kind of getting our channels off the ground. But I can tell you here in episode 1, you can find me at the Central Texas Rabbit Hole on YouTube. So that's at Central Texas Rabbit Hole, and I will be creating a Twitter channel for that, and probably in BitChute and Rumble as well. So definitely stay tuned, and we'll be giving more details in episode 2.
All right. Thanks, PJ. I will be on the platform formerly known as Twitter, which is now X, as at Jake Discerning, on YouTube with the same channel. And we'll be on Substack as well for more elaboration of these ideas. We haven't been entirely on top of all the details and facts of some of the topics that we're bringing up. So I'll be doing some recaps of episodes with kind of show notes. So you can look for that on Substack. And we'll definitely be on Rumble with our joint podcast. We're thinking of this as a mixtape. So we might have our own thing going on, but this is our joint conversations under the current name, which is Reframing the Narrative. And so let us know if you can find us. Send us a note and let us know how you did find us and what you'd like us to cover. If you know any good guests, or if you want to be a guest, and we'll be in touch. And until the next time, what are we looking forward to covering next week?
That's a good question. Maybe we put that out for a vote for our listeners, or maybe a day or two ahead of time. We'll put a few topics out there, but love to get everyone's thoughts on what we should be talking about or covering.
Sounds perfect.
Stay tuned.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.